You touched on something interesting though. So clearly the name of the show, What is Money? It opens this, I consider this kind of like the gateway to the rabbit hole. But you went straight to one of the next questions, which I think is, equally, if not more important, which is value. Like this is a very nebulous term for a lot of people. So if you don't mind going further into the deep end, how would you define value?
So value to me is something that allows me to express my will into the world, both geographically and over time, beyond my kind of my own physical body. So I might value, my car. Okay. Why? Because my car allows me to go to wherever I want. So geographically, it gives me a power to drive around and see things or do things that I might not otherwise if I had to walk. So I assign it a value. If I have a different model car, it might be more than transportation value. Maybe I'm socially signaling because I'm driving a nice fancy car. So to me, value starts with what does it give me the ability to do and express out into the world beyond my physical body, and geographically, like I said, and through time. So, purchasing power is one kind of attribute of value, but also the ability to see my will exerted into the universe. It can take so many different forms. Now, how would you distill that down to like the value I see in relationships, maybe with family members? That's much more difficult to quantify, but obviously we all seek some of these other values to express them with our families, for example, maybe security, love, relationships, whatever that is. We seek value out in the real world so that we can increase our value and that of our family. And then I think that extends out into our community, our nation, and then ultimately the world. And so I look for things that connect those things.
Yeah, well said. One of the kind of rough definitions, because this is another one of those terms that has a ton of meaning and definitions and angles, but one of the short definitions I give for value is that it's relevance to your goal-directed action. So whatever goal you're in pursuit of, if something accelerates you toward achieving that goal or that aim, it's valuable. And if it's not relevant to that course of goal-directed action, it's valueless, right? It doesn't have any value to you. And if it blocks you, then it's actually destructive to value, right? It's an impediment of some kind. So I think that's a great example you gave there with the car. But to your further point, it's not siloed to one domain, right? It's not just this thing gets me faster across space or this thing does something for me across time. There's also like the sentimental dimension with family and, love and all of these things. So that's a whole rabbit hole too. I love that one. I do want to drill into something you said there though. So the power to express your willpower, the ability to express your willpower into the world. We'd say that's kind of a rough approximation of value, which I really like. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately because clearly physical power is very important, right? Like the case of the car giving you this physical power to move across space faster than you otherwise could. But there's this, so that's important. That's like what the reason we have economics to a large extent is to increase, our productivity, I guess you could say, which is the ability to convert our willpower into physical power of some kind. But the problem with this is that we also simultaneously have to check ourselves or defend ourselves against the unwanted imposition of others' willpower onto us, right? This is like the reason you would hold gold, for instance, historically, is because no one could inflate it, right? No one could increase the supply. So this was a defense mechanism against the willpower of others. So there's like this balancing act we're trying to maintain. It's like, how do we manifest more of our willpower into physical power in the world through capital and, things like that, capital and trade. but simultaneously, how do we protect ourselves from the arbitrary willpower of others? So what, I mean, that's an interesting, I'm just thinking out loud, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, that's like that's the root of the social contract. That's the root of all of our human endeavors, is the trade-off between self and other. Mm-hmm. Is that at what level do you have to accept or compromise your will to somebody else's will? And what are the trade-offs? I think it's not a static answer. It's depending on the context. There's always trade-offs. In some cases, I may defer to the will of others. For example, if I entered into a contractual arrangement with someone and I was in the wrong, a judge would decide that I was in the wrong, and I may have to pay compensation to that party. In that case, I would default to someone else's will, which is the judge, which is imbued supposedly by the state. If I didn't think that was fair, I could exit out, right? You can commit suicide, you can leave to another country, you can go into exile. There are things that you can do that are drastic, but at some point, at the end of the day, all you really have true power over, I guess, is yourself. If you have to exist in a context of a disbalance between your will and other people's will, then you have to entertain the idea of a common set of law, maybe, or the state, or some agreement of consensus rules. For example, like in Bitcoin, you have to accept something other than maybe what you personally conceptualized. So the reason I like things like Bitcoin is because I have the power to choose which set of rules I want to participate in. It's not compelled. And as I said earlier in the discussion, I felt like something was denied me as a child by that value expression being imposed on me in the sense of currency. And that violation didn't become apparent to me until I started learning about how money is instantiated and how it's used in the economy. That's a violation, right? So now, to me, it's more about how do I opt into networks or forms of value expression that are more beneficial to me, allow me to exert more of my will into the world, as you said, and but without necessarily violating someone else's rights or will. And that's where I think markets have such an important role to play, because markets, to me, are kind of the efficient distillation of that process, that ongoing process between my will and everyone else's. And for example, I could go instantiate a fork of Bitcoin tomorrow. Doesn't matter. My will is completely irrelevant that I did that because nobody else would recognize that fork. It's not the original, and maybe mine has 60 million supply in it. Nobody would adopt that. I can't force anyone else to accept those rules of consensus. Maybe I could convince a few and trick them into it, but there's just no way that would happen. And so that's just kind of this programmatic way of this balance between my will and the will of everyone else. So that's one of the things that compelled me to this space.